Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. This is a test of the Derry Cooperative School District live broadcasting system. Testing 1, 2, 3. Okay.
Jonathan? Good evening and welcome to this school board meeting. This is a facilities workshop. We will begin as usual with the Pledge of Allegiance. So this is our third, if I counted right, third facilities meeting. Tonight we are going to be taking a look at some potential Plan B plans along with some costs for Plan A. These are things that the school board has been working on. We will continue the discussion tonight. We will also have a follow-up roundup overview of what we discussed tonight at Tuesday at the school board meeting. We will have any further discussions there, and there will be time for public comment on Tuesday. For those in the audience, if you are interested in looking at what we're looking at, all of the attachments are posted online, and for those that come into the meeting, they're at the end of the table for you to pick up. So tonight I'm going to begin with John and let him talk about his thoughts on Plan B.
All right. I just wanted to really put together kind of a visual representation of kind of what the numbers would be. So first, I appreciate what the administration did with the Plan B and their suggestions. And I know we've heard a lot of feedback, and I think it's important that in order for us to start moving forward, we do have to start figuring out what the numbers and the figures are for a Plan B if we were to move forward, or if Plan A doesn't go forward as proposed. So I'll just explain this, starting with what's in blue. This is essentially just the information that we've been given over the past few months from Lovely Brensinger as far as what repairs need to be done. So that's cost of repairs from Lovely Brensinger. That is a breakdown of school by school, what the minimal repairs would be. That doesn't include anything from like a mechanical, some mechanical work is in there, which is why I didn't include it, but some mechanical, electrical upgrades, plumbing, and structural. So those are just kind of really a lot of things that I saw were like door hardware, window hardware, ceiling finishes, flooring, just kind of things that should continually be done and should have been done for the life of these buildings. And then I also took the roof repairs. Those numbers came from Jane's and Jeremy's maintenance improvement plan that they presented on Monday during the budget overview. So I just took those numbers from there and put them in there, and then went through and for those structural, plumbing, and electrical upgrades. Because there's not any hard numbers in there, I just put a checkbox of which schools were in need of those, and then I put some placeholder estimates in there. I think if we were to do these, I would not be surprised if those numbers ended up being higher, but I hope we do get some hard numbers on that. And so essentially what's in this blue is essentially saying, hey, at a minimum, I think if we were to keep all of the schools in the structure that they were currently today, so the 5 elementary schools with the 2 middle schools, that we'd be, again, probably in the neighborhood of 45, if not closer to $50 million in repairs. In the green, I took the low end of the renovation estimates that Lovely Brensinger presented to us. So if we were to renovate and bring the schools up to really today's standards and what the needs of our students would be, again, all in, we'd be looking at $118 million. And then that third section that is all in red is really just taken from Jane and Jeremy's maintenance improvement plan, and that's over the next 10 years. And I think it's important to note that what is in there is mainly the roofs. There is some flooring that is in there as well, but there would be not much structural, plumbing, electrical, or mechanical repairs that would be done. And so even without that stuff being done, we'd still be looking at in the neighborhood of $12 million. So I think that's all just to say that we really do need to start figuring out what numbers are going to look like if we were to do a capital improvement plan. I also think there should be some consideration, and it looks like some bonds were presented as well. So I think that's another avenue we need to entertain as far as figuring out, do we try to do these large one-time repairs for structural, plumbing, electrical, mechanical, and roofs, and try to bond those out? Or do we move forward with a capital improvement or capital reserve fund that would have to still, I would say, my suggestion would be a substantial number on an annual basis to fund, that we fund from the unreserved fund balance. So I just wanted to lay out kind of all the facts and the figures as far as what we're looking at and what repairs need to be done, and what we currently have in place.
So one thing I will add is that on Tuesday, Mark Jobin, did I pronounce that right? Is going to be coming to our meeting and telling us what he would charge to give us some estimates at Derry Village and South Range. There's been some questions about very specific things at those buildings that were marked as needing more investigation, specifically things related to the building envelope and things related to the ceiling. So we're going to have him come on Tuesday and tell us an estimate of what it would cost to look into us and give us those numbers, so we could put those numbers with these and really have a better sense of what costs would be. So that's something else that would fit into this picture, but we don't have right now. David, did you want to talk about?
Sure.
So we had a couple, since this is a workshop, we do have different people trying to work on things, come up with ideas so we can have a discussion. David also did some work on a plan B if a bond for a new school didn't pass, and what he saw as needed. And that is in your packet or online for those at home.
Thank you, Erica. Yeah, so I took a crack at this as well. So when you look at, I think it's page 3 of the packet here, 3 of 4. It starts with Plan B. So I took a similar approach. I've always said from the beginning of this process, I thought roofs are the #1 priority, along with the new school. So what I did was I started off with the roofs. I took the number, as Jonathan did as well, I took the numbers from the maintenance improvement plan. I think I added the 3% inflation, which, if it's right or wrong, it's not important at this point. And you'll see that number as the $4.7 million number. I haven't read the Derry Village question, and the question that we need to decide is, are we going to put money into Derry Village? And South Range, we need to talk about that as well, obviously. I didn't even include South Range. My assumptions in this Plan B would stick to our original plan, the closure of South Range. So that's pretty self-explanatory. And then the second part here is we got a summary of top issues from La Valley back in May, so it's a little older. But and I tried to pick out the most important ones. Obviously, everyone has their own ideas what the most important ones. These were mine. What you're seeing here is a very summary level. I have all the detail is on the La Valley report. That's you'll build a tick and tie, and I can put together a more detailed layout of those. But in summary level, they're pretty consistent to what Jonathan was saying. You got the electrical upgrades, sprinkler and fire alarm upgrades. I put the flooring needs in here. I know that's a big nut in the maintenance improvement plan. Plumbing upgrades and building structure needs. As I mentioned in the La Valley report back in March, the summary top items, they're much more detailed and pretty directed at what they are. For sake of time, I kind of spared us that. And I put the schools that are affected by each one. Obviously, flooring, I think, is pretty much across the board in the district. And as Erica said, I reached out to Jay a couple weeks ago on the same topic of the estimator that did for the new school, and I thought, can we contract him to kind of go through any detailed items that we pull out as a board and kind of give us some cost estimates, and Jay indicated that it could be done in a pretty timely manner. It wouldn't be a long, drawn-out process. I think you guys have come up with that as well, which is great. So, I put $20 million down here, and it's a number I pulled out of the air right now, but it can be something that sounds like it can be populated relatively quickly in a time frame that will still keep us hopefully on track. So coming down, so if you just, the next section is just totals, you get totals, roofs and repairs, it's $24,700,000, $800,000. And I did add a placeholder for demoing of South Range at $1 million, which I think we talked about way back when it was about that cost to demo one of the schools. So, you know, at this point, that gets you to about $25 million bond, $25,800,000 bond. You know, I think at the end of the day, that's another thing we need to decide. What's our appetite for a bond in a Plan B? And in my little discussion here, I don't include any of the costs from the 1,000-page report, because and that's something we just need to discuss. But my thought is, we just have to start building up that capital reserve plan, reserve, and maybe fund some of that through operations, or maybe we include in a bond. That's obviously what we're here to do. But I left it out of this discussion in my report here. So the one thing that we've discussed at different meetings is, you know, when you're looking at a bond and you know, the interest rates right now is around 5% being conservatively, which is lower than the mortgage rate, which is typical in a bond market, from what I understand. We should take into account when you're figuring out a bond, we do have the Barker bond coming off the books at $1.2 million, and then we got a rough estimate of what a South Range closure looks like from a dollars perspective. You know, I think it was $900,000. I put $800,000 for round numbers to get to the $2 million. So when you look at that $2 million, so if you look at the fourth page, and keep in mind, this is very rough estimates. This is based on information that was given to me back in July, but I think it's worth to take a quick look at it. So the column before the highlighted column, that's what the tax rate increase would be at a $25,800,000 bond at 5%. The column in yellow, I tried to take out the $2 million savings, and that would factor the tax impact. And it looks like it holds true, because if you look at year one here, the principal and interest is $2,128,500. So if you're taking off $2 million off that, you know, in savings, in potential savings coming off the books, you're really increasing your budget by $128,000. That's just the kind of mindset I was looking at when I did this. And then obviously in the right-hand side, you know, the tax rates are pretty small in that scenario. And I get some feedback when I brought this up a long time ago was, you know, we have increases in our budget, we see increases, but the way I look at this is, you know, whether you're paying a Barker bond or not, you're still going to have increases in your budget. So I look at it as apples to apples when, if you consider the Barker bond coming off the books and savings at South Range, you are offsetting costs that you would be bringing back on, because that's the way I look at it. I know some feedback I got previously people did not tend to look at it that way. So, I mean, that's where I come from on this, on the Plan B part. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of discussion that would need to happen. I'm sure people have different ideas, what they see as the most priorities for the repairs would be. And I think there needs to be a lot of discussion on the 1,000-page report, how much of that we're willing to fund through a bond or operations or a capital reserve, like Jonathan said. So just some other assumptions. So, and I go back and forth on this, and when we talk about, I know when you close a school, you got to redistrict, or we talk about redistricting. We talked about a fifth and sixth grade in middle school and all that, so that's something obviously we had to drill down on. But, and then, and I think the final thing with regards to the bond, I mean, whatever bond, if we go that route, we need a bond that has to be able to refinance in 5 to 10 years. Obviously, that would be something that we need to go after. I can stop there, or I can go through the Plan A part. It's up to you, Erica, how you want to handle that. I think maybe that's a good stopping point.
This really is a workshop. It's more of a discussion. I was just looking for people to bring to the table what they thought we should be discussing tonight. So, do people have questions or thoughts for either John or David? These were things they worked on individually.
I appreciate the work you guys put into this. The numbers here, obviously, we have to do the estimates until we can get Mark Jobin in here. I think one of the things that we need to think about is in a bond versus appropriating through taxes each year. When I think of a bond, I think of we're asking 2/3 of our voters to invest in our schools. You look at our last two bonds, and you have the Honeywell bond that we're still paying, and that's an investment of we are getting back money each time that we, you know, have the savings in there. You look at the Barker Hood bond that was building a new school in there. Right now, what we're investing in with this we keep talking about what do we just need to fix as a Plan B, what just needs to be done. And when we talk about that, we are saddling future boards with the cost of today's problems. So we have a lot to do, but I feel like appropriating these in a capital reserve each year, like you said, there's $1.2 million coming off the books. If we can agree on a warrant article to appropriate those into this fund each year, or like I have the budget here, we have 2 roofs in here. I'm afraid that if we go to bond and we put all of these big items in a bond, and we don't pass a 2/3 bond to this, we have nothing. We have nothing in the budget, we have nothing in our capital reserve, and we can't get anything done. There is no Plan B, there's no Plan C. We are now back to Band-Aids, duct tape, and WD-40. And we need to think of what can pass and what we need. We obviously think that the best route forward for a bond is Plan A. That's why we're doing that. That is the investment into the future. When we think of what we need to do now, I think the best course forward is building that reserve up. And yes, there's going to be some where we have the leftover money at the end of the year, but I think that we're going to need to do appropriations each year, whether it be we decide we're going to do 1.2 every year, or like you said, the 2 million each year. And that's where we can get the roofs done. That's where we can do that. And we don't have a 2/3 on those. And I think it's a safer route forward for our maintenance. We promise that we will not be cutting maintenance. So we either put it in the budget or we put it out to a warrant article, but they do need that money. And to try and pass a bond at the same time as passing, trying to pass a school, I think is going to be a very difficult ask. So
One thing I agree on about what you said is I think we definitely need a maintenance capital reserve or a capital reserve fund. I don't know what wording you want to use, but I think having something like that we establish and we put money in every year and create a precedent that hopefully future boards will as well is really critical, so that the district has a constant flow of a constant source of money to do repairs as they come up. And I definitely wouldn't want to put us in a situation where we said we're going to do a bond for all these roofs, the bond fails, and then we can't fix the roofs until they're literally leaking in. So I do definitely like the idea of coming up with a dollar amount we're comfortable with and creating a capital reserve fund that we put in and then try to put in each year, so we build up money to do projects that are needed. So that's one aspect of this. I don't know if you'd call it a Plan A or a Plan B, but just something we need to do regardless that I think is really important now and down the road.
Excuse me. What I fear is pretty much what Jessica said as far as the saddling a future board with the problems, but also the way that we, and as well as other boards, may look at these issues if we basically just put enough money in to get by. And that's obviously not a good plan, because at that point you'll never be getting ahead. If you put enough money in there to get by, with the objective in the future to fix everything properly, now we're dealing with, at this point, we have a board that's been saddled with the maintenance that has never been done. So we're well aware of that situation, and what happens is that not only are these problems continuing to deteriorate, but the rate of deterioration is going to start increasing. And at that point, the day-to-day maintenance, which really isn't maintenance at this point, it's going to become new construction basically, is going to be beyond the scope of what we appropriated for maintenance, no matter what we do. And we're still going to end up with the same problems, dealing with them in 2 or 3 years. They're the blowout patches. So I think that we've got to look at something that is going to get us at least somewhat ahead of the curve, and not just keeping up with it. Because if we keep up with it, in a few years, we'll fall behind again. And the money that we spent for that 2 or 3 year period to get us by is basically money that we're wasting. We might as well flush it down the toilet. It's really not going to help us at all. So I have that thought. Do I have any solutions to it? Well, obviously, the solution is to do it right the first time. But other than that, do we want to do the large-scale maintenance, or do we want to do something that's a little bit less extensive? That's the only questions that we have for ourselves. But I really, really, really think that, and this is directed mostly to the people that may be watching right now or in the audience, is that you've got to think about, this is your money, and do you want to waste it? And if we're going to just do enough to get by, you're wasting your money. And I don't want to waste your money or mine.
So I think we have two separate discussion items on the table. Both are valid. One is the discussion of a capital reserve, and one is a discussion of a Plan B. And I think those are two different things. They're related, but I think they're not exactly the same. So maybe if we separate them out for a sec, both John and David talked about ideas for Plan B. Maybe we can return to that discussion of what we do if the bond for the new school does not pass, kind of what people think is the most viable Plan B, and kind of start there and see how far we can get.
Yeah, I would, yeah, I think that's I think that's the proper way to look at it. And, in my Plan B, I look at, we should have both, but if we're just looking at a capital reserve, my only concern is, if we put $2 million a year in there, how much can you actually get done? And how long is it going to take to get it done? And I'm not saying, that's the one thing I fear, but I don't know what's worse, fearing that or fearing the bond not passing. We have nowhere to be, nowhere to go. And then, so it's a tough question. I think we need to do both, in my opinion. But I think we need to, if we go to the cap reserve route, and that we're thinking that's our main road, I don't know if $2 million a year gets it done for all the things we need. So that's kind of where I'm at with that.
So I guess I'll clarify. I was actually thinking we do need to do both a capital reserve fund and have a solid Plan B. I was just trying to separate the two things out because I think they're two separate issues. Having some kind of capital reserve that you put even $500,000 in every year, some amount, so that you have regular money going in, so when something breaks, you have an account you can go to, like a savings account in your house. And then the Plan B, we need a solid Plan B if the bond fails. So I think I don't think we have the solid numbers right now to say what that number would be, but David certainly put together some numbers about what 28 million would look like, and John put together some numbers that was a larger number that was more like 44 million. I honestly don't know what the right number is, but I definitely think we do need to come up with that number and decide how we want to put that on the warrant.
I agree, and I think the more time that passes, the less time we have to educate, advocate for whatever we choose. And so that's why I'm getting more and more anxious about that, because, there's a case to be made for a $35 million bond that doesn't affect the tax rate as much as people would think it would if you consider the monies that are coming off the books, and if we're still as a board okay with moving forward with the South Range closure. But I know that, that's something that we just need to hammer down and figure out. And I think, like I said, time's running out, and to educate and advocate is running out. So that's my other concern.
I think we hear the feedback. I think we have to understand that we've put forward a Plan A, and that's what we believe to be the best. We do need a Plan B, and there is some, we've heard there's some vocal crowds that they want to keep South Range. That plan in the blue is essentially a plan to keep the district the exact same way that it is today, with the exact same buildings, and gives us the ability to maintain and bring those real, I would say, not just to where they need to be, but it gives them roof repairs. It gives us the ability to repair the structures. It gives us the ability to do the plumbing and electrical upgrades and mechanical upgrades that we need to as well. And then, again, those repairs at some point in the next 10 years have to get done. And so that is essentially my thought process behind everything in the blue is we've got a plan A. We think that the best financial decision for the district, and it still gives us the ability to educate our kids at the level that we want to educate our kids and provide for the staff for their needs, that plan A is the best route. We've already decided that. I hear the feedback. If that is not going to get passed, then we need to, the public needs to understand that still leaves us with a ton of repairs and a ton of items that have to get checked off. And that comes with the price tag. So that's where that $45 million comes in, is that is the price, right? It could be, if we really wanted to renovate things and make things new and give kids a 21st century learning environment, then that's where the renovations come in, and that's $120 million. Again, I don't think we can afford that. If I was a taxpayer, someone put out $120 million, like, yeah, that's unaffordable. $45 million, if you want to keep the district the way that it is situated today, maybe that is a bite that you can chew. Maybe that is something you can swallow. Like that's the way I'm looking at this right now. I still think even if we did a bond for $45 million, we still would need a capital reserve fund as well. That being said, there's still no guarantee that Plan B is going to get passed. And I think there needs to be discussion around, well, what happens if Plan A or Warrant 1 and Warrant 2 and Warrant 3 or whatever we decide, what happens when none of those come to fruition and we're still left saddled with the inactions of now the taxpayers and our board and the previous boards. And at that point, I think revisiting the administration's plan about redistricting and moving to 4 elementary schools, K through 4, having a 5, 6, 7, 8 model is something that people need to understand that is potentially a reality. So in 2 out of these 3 scenarios, there is at least one school closing. And none of us feel comfortable with that. I do not feel good about potentially taking away a school from a family that moved into that South Range district, or, I mean, yeah, like but these things have real dollar amounts, and so it is time to understand that, okay, we've got an option potentially to get state aid in Plan A that will hopefully net out to be around $50 million. What I've laid out in the blue, $45 to $50 million. Similar price, keeps things the exact same way, but we still have really old bones in the buildings, and a lot of work to do. A lot of work to do. And then really, if neither of those pass, then again, I still think people are going to have to consider that reality is that we cannot continue on looking at all of the repairs that we need and looking at the budget that we have right now. We cannot go to the taxpayers and say, hey, here's a $100 million budget, and and you're not going to see any improvements in any of the buildings.
I'm just going to add a piece. We did, with the idea of some different plans and so forth, we did talk to our lawyer, Gordon Graham, to find out about the whole warrant situation. And of course, we do those warrants where if the budget does not pass, will the town, but those, as Jane says, those are non-monetary. But we did get from Gordon that you can do a monetary and go to, if Plan A does not pass, whatever the Plan B may be, you can say if the town does not vote to appropriate or pass warrant A1 or whatever for the new school, then whatever Plan B is with a monetary figure. If Plan B, if warrant 2 does not pass, which, pick one of these, right? Okay, it's going to be the one where the smaller number, but still closes South Range. And then maybe Plan C becomes the in-between number that doesn't close anything. You can word those warrants, so if warrant 1 doesn't pass, will the town do this? If warrant 2 doesn't pass, will the town, and of course we'll get Gordon's help on how those will be written up, but I just wanted to let you folks know that there is that option to go from a monetary to a monetary to a monetary with the warrants. Now, he was very honest. He said, well, if you have another warrant, then there's a good chance that the first warrant that's most expensive and so forth won't pass. But you know what? One thing that I like about this is the school board's making some decisions and the town is being allowed to vote what they believe they want to vote. And because I know that everybody, we've said it here, we would all love to keep things status quo. You know, why would we as administrators want to lose other administrators and potentially some of our staff members and so forth? We all know we're trying to take the emotion out of this, and I do believe that coming up with some different plans and being able to allow the town to then, you know, we'll have some information about where we rank as far as if Plan A goes through like it is. That will be somewhat helpful, and I think we all will have to do some, make sure that the town is well aware of what each of these warrants are, and see what the voters say.
So I think one of the things we have to keep in mind that Plan A is always what you think is the best option, both considering the money we have and what's best for all kids, and we've already decided what that would be. I do think, at least in my opinion, a Plan B would be more along the lines of, similar to what David did, but more along the lines of what Jonathan laid out, in that it keeps all the schools open, because I think Plan B needs to be a course of action that is less intrusive. Plan A is always your most kind of pie in the sky, and then you want to say, realistic, we need to do something, and then for me, kind of maybe Plan C would be, if we can't pass a bond to do either of these things, then we really will most likely be faced with having to close a building, because we won't have money to repair a building, we won't have money to build a new building, and we'll have a lot of repairs we're facing. So I think, to me, those are kind of the realistic first 3 options, and since we did vote on Plan A last spring, we didn't do a detailed look at the costs, at some very specific costs at Derry Village and South Range that were really stumping us when it was advised to us of those 2 schools, and very specifically those were some structural things, some issues with the ceiling, some issues with the building envelope, and until we have some of those numbers, we really don't know how realistic Jonathan or David, David's don't include all of them, but either of these numbers really are, because we don't really know. My understanding was those were very large things that could trump these numbers, and I feel like that's why Mark Jobin's going to come on Tuesday. I think those are numbers we need to know as we move forward in this process. So that's where I fall.
I honestly don't know what to say. I'm going to say I'm frustrated because back in the spring or summer, when we had the option to vote on the new school, I said then I would like a second option, and we didn't want a second option, right? So now we might have 4, which I don't think is a good idea either. I think, personally, I would support Jonathan's option, but why is East Derry's roof in there when it doesn't need to be repaired? Like, there's some things in there that, some things that can be taken off of that number, but I'm gonna say again, I'm not in favor of closing any school. And for me, it's because of the children in those buildings. We can find a way to fix them. The children need to stay in their neighborhood schools. We live in a crazy world. They love their schools, they love their teachers, they love walking to school, they they feel safe and secure there. That matters to me. So that's where I am. I would support this. I would support David's too if he kept South Range open. But I said this in the beginning, that's what I'll support. And I haven't changed my mind since July.
With respect to your comment, Austin, about the waterfalling of the number of articles, the only thing I fear about that, and it's not it's more of a numerical thing than anything else, is that potentially we could end up with an overwhelming majority of people that want to do something, but because there are so many options, we don't get any two-thirds at all. And it frustrates everyone at that point. Now, what do we do about that? I don't know. Perhaps, if you talk to Gordon again, you can, by the nod of your head, I can tell that you probably already anticipated that. So I just worry about too many choices, and then at the end of the day, potentially the vast majority of taxpayers, voters, get nothing, and they all wanted something. And that's difficult too.
And Gordon agrees with you. That's why, as I said, he even said even having two
Right.
sometimes can negate one or the other one. And I wasn't saying you should have 3 or 4. I was just saying you can.
Can, yeah.
It's allowed that you can go from a monetary to a monetary. I just want to address a couple of things. One thing, and Joe, you can chime in here because you did a lot with the numbers. Without going to a 5, 6, 7, 8, we would most likely, David, you had I would like to hear a more detailed plan to discuss deep. I would say that under your plan, with closing a school, we would probably need to keep deep at Gilbert H. Hood. And we were tight because we looked at it from a standpoint of if we close a school and don't do 5, 6, move 5th grade up, it's going to still be like it is now. The room is at the middle school. We would have to look at numbers, and Joe, am I pretty much on target with, Joe was indicating when we looked at, it would be very tight at this stage of the game, because I do think there was, I think that number that was thrown out way back when Dan McKenna was here, was something like 1925. We're above that at this point with our enrollment. So I understand where Brenda's coming, not just from the standpoint of not wanting to close a school. And that's why when I look at, maybe it needs to be a either or. Are we going to do a new school, plan A, and do what we said we were going to do? Or if that doesn't pass, are we going to try to keep the schools open for even if it's for the time being, and see where we go with enrollment and so forth, without closing any of the schools, and see how that plays out, and see how the town, hopefully if it's that 1 or 2, if they don't want A, they don't want 1, they vote for 2, hopefully. So that's a thought as well.
Let me ask the board a question. This is something that came up on a phone call I had the other day. So is it my understanding we have 2 bites at the apple with the school, right? So if we held off putting the school on the warrant this year and focused on a Plan B, and if Plan B passes, I guess that's the route we go, but my point is, we could hold off a year and still have an opportunity to get building aid, correct? No, we have 2 bites at the apple. I remember him telling us one of the previous meeting, this year and next year's warrants. And, I mean, I don't want to confuse voters, and I don't want to make this overly complicated. My personal opinion, I like John's plan. I like the $45 million, and I'm willing to compromise not closing South Range if that's what it comes down to to bring groups of people together that wouldn't vote for it because of that, and maybe we can sell a Plan B if we do keep it. It's not my preference, but I understand we have a lot of repairs and we need to do something, and there has to be a compromise, I think, to get it done, and maybe that's the compromise. I'm not saying it would work, but I don't know where else to go with it, but that's a thought.
I mean, to echo, like, first, I don't want to, I don't want to take credit for a plan. These are just the numbers that were laid out, right? These are literally just facts, other than the structural, plumbing, electrical estimates. So, I am still for going ho on Plan A. I still think that. We were told to bring in options or think about things for a Plan B, and that is what I did. David, I appreciate you doing that as well. I wish, I'll be honest, guys, the other 4 people here, like, can't rely on just the 2 people here that have brought forward options or plans, or any numbers or figures. So I'd love to hear if there's any other original ideas here that we can put on the table. Like, again, I don't think this is a fully formed Plan B that I put together. I think it's well thought out. I think the numbers are accurate, but yeah, again, I'd love to hear what anyone else has to say, because I do feel David and I's plans or ideas are pretty similar. But yeah, I'd love to hear if there's
So I
anything.
think everyone brings different strengths to the table, and everyone brings different skills to the board. And what I brought to the discussion tonight, after looking at both of these things and thinking about all of this a lot, is this was not my strength pulling this together, but what I see needed to move forward, even with something like this isn't a hard enough number for me, because I know from that report that there were some huge building envelope issues and a lot of ceiling issues at South Range and Derry Village. And if we're going to put forward a Plan B, it needs to be a real one. I need to know what's the cost of those repairs. I think those repairs alone could trump that entire $20 million in your middle column. And I need to know what that is before I put forward any number. So I'm not opposed to a plan like this, but that's why I reached out and asked them to bring Mark Jobin in. That was, I guess you could say, my thought on how to move things forward, saying, I need to know. I know there's these huge issues that they couldn't pinpoint, and until I have a number on those, I can't say what is a number that would work for voters and what is a number we could work with. So for me, but I will also say I still do think that when you're looking at equity for all students and with the finances we have, our best option is Plan A, because we cannot equitably serve 7 schools the way they're split up now. And that's it's about finances and everything else, but it's looking at a larger picture of all needs all at once and trying to give a little bit of what everyone needs. But for this Plan B, for me, I need more on what's needed at a couple of schools, things that weren't in that report that were named as really big things. So that's where I'm at, and that we'll get some information on Tuesday on what it would cost to get those numbers, and there may be other things people need that were bigger than we could get out of the report from La Valley, and people can certainly ask Mark Jobin about that as well, but that's personally what I need. But I would stress that we all work really hard on this board. We bring different strengths to the table. We bring different skills. And I know we've all been thinking about these issues and trying to think of what we think is the best path forward, and that's what I think we need to do next.
So I agree with you, and what I would say is, it doesn't hurt to be prepared to if we have a number that we're willing to bring forward. It doesn't hurt to have that ahead of time before we have these costs. I mean, at the end of the day, we need to know what people's comfort level for a bond and what the comfort level on this board is to increase the tax rate at. So I don't think it's not productive to have that discussion. I think we're October, I don't know what today is, 20th. Assuming you get quotes by mid-November, we gotta hustle, and we gotta chip off as much as we can ahead of time before we get to that point. And I think in discussing what a bond number looks like is not out of the question. It doesn't mean it can't change, but we need to figure out where the board consensus is at and what we're willing to swallow. I mean, is the town willing to present to the town? I think we need to have that discussion, and I think we need to have discussion on South Range and Derry Village outside of that. We need to know where we're heading toward that as well. But I'll make one more comment before I know. So Plan A, I supported it and I agree with it, but going through this process, building a new school and closing 2 schools is not enough for the district, and I think my numbers represent that. I don't know how we can just put on a ballot, and this is still a discussion point, just a school and nothing else, because that's not, I don't think that's productive, and I don't think that gets us where we want to be either. So that's something, not to throw another monkey wrench, but that's something we got to consider as well as we move forward. And the numbers start to get real when you start adding that in, and they start to become on top of what the discussion was earlier this week with the budget. You start adding with the budget increases, you start adding these increases. We're talking significant tax increases, and obviously, we need to be cognizant of that as well.
I think it's time that we had a meeting to talk about the school, or the schools, with the public, like a public hearing, or not a public hearing, but a meeting for people to come and only talk about the school with us. They haven't had that opportunity. We've done it for months, some of us years, and we know that there's a lot of discussion in the community. It's not coming here. We need to open it up and let people come and talk about it. And it'll be a big meeting, but we need to do it. We did it once in the gym. We heard what people wanted, and we need to do that again. That's my opinion.
So I think, just to answer you, David, I think it is productive to talk about numbers, but what I was getting at is I want to know what I'm getting for my numbers, and I'm just not comfortable with this number right now because I have big questions about building envelope and ceiling issues, and I think they could be way bigger than the number we're looking at here, and that really worries me. That 45 million wouldn't get us very much, unfortunately. That was my concern I was getting at.
To buttress up your comment, Erica, if anyone remembers, I think it was 2 meetings ago, I asked Jay, in preparation for going into a procedure like this for myself, could they rough out a price tag for each of those repairs if we gave them a list of prioritized repairs, and they said they couldn't do it. These gentlemen they're architects. They do this every day, and they said they're really not able to do that with what they have. So I looked at myself and I said, I'm not a structural engineer. I'm not an architect. I didn't even flunk out of architectural school. So if they can't do that, for me to agonize over this, and even furthermore, come in with figures and present them as viable, I don't have any credibility here. What I do know, that, along with what Dave said, is that I think that we can't continue on with, like a set of skis, with one foot going this way and one going the other way, and trying to do everything all the time. If our objective down the road is we really think we're going to build a new school, dumping $40 or $50 million into something that's going to get us by for a while in case we don't pass it, I think it's foolhardy. If we're going to decide that we're going to fix the schools, then we've got to fix the schools. They've got to be fixed right. We've got to go back and get them up to code. We've got to get them so the students can learn in them and they're safe. And so many other things have to be done the right way. So I think that we've got to make a commitment at some point, and the sooner the better, as to how we're going to go about that. Everyone agree that the new school is the priority that we voted on, but if we have a plan that we come up with that's everyone calls the Plan B at this point, I think that we have to be able to look at that plan and say, okay, that plan's going to work now. And if we can't do that, then we're back to, as we said, bussing people around and doing a lot of other things that don't necessarily serve anyone very well. But that was my comment on those things.
Okay, I got a ton of comments, and I agree with something from everybody here that's on the board. Erica, I know where you're coming from. I agree 100%. You folks have to vote. You will get an estimate from Mike Jobin, the estimator, and you guys will have to vote to say, like you did with Honeywell, yeah, we want you to look into this. And as Erica said, the thought process would be South Range and Derry Village. But what it seems to down the road is most likely he may have to look at all of our buildings and give those better figures where people can look at that and say, oh yeah, we got to fix the roof and we got to fix the facade and so forth and so on. And this is a ballpark of what it's going to cost. I understand where David's coming from. Like Dawn's over Marblehead, for me, when I realized that, because I'm the superintendent of schools, why wouldn't I want a new building? I think it's fantastic to have a brand-new building with all of the extra great things that we put into things. It will lend itself to our competency-based education, where we're going, and so forth and so on. But there's 5 other buildings that are going to be still here. So now I'm just putting forward Plan A without looking at some of these things that David and Jonathan have looked at with these other buildings. And then I understand where you're coming from, Jessica, because we don't want to get into a situation where we go through this process and we have nothing, because we know we need to put some monies into these. And Brenda, I understand where you're coming from. I hope if we have a public hearing, we know that there's a lot of people. We could just tell them to raise their hand. Who doesn't want to close South Range? Okay, we know there's a majority of the people sitting here. We need, what do you want to do? What will you be willing to afford? What will you be willing to vote for in lieu of? And, maybe this Plan B is something where if we're not going to close the school, what are we willing to put on the tax burden coming down the future so that we can fix up these buildings if that's what the town wants? So I think we're getting there. I think we're getting close. And I just hope that if we do have a public hearing that we want to hear everything. We not only want to hear what people are willing to do, but we want to hear from all sides of this issue, so that it can be brought out. And I don't know how to go about doing that. You can't force people to come. You can't force people to show up. Maybe we don't want to give. We want to give advance notice, but we don't want to push this off too far if we're going to do something like that. So yeah, I think this is moving in the right direction. I'm proud of the school board for making some decisions, and as difficult as they may be, and the fact that it's not 100% across the board. But yeah, I do think that input and getting some information about what the town is willing to do, in that process, trying to take that emotion out of it, which is so difficult in these situations.
So we keep saying we want to hear from them, come and talk to us, but they can't talk here. And they come to a school board meeting and it's not on the agenda, and they don't want to bring it up because they don't want to be shut down. So I think we need to have a special meeting only about this project, whatever it is going to be, and people can tell us what it is that they think, whether it's keep South Range open, close South Range, open this, whatever, build a new school, and why. I think we owe that to our parents, to our kids, to our staff, and to everybody in the community that doesn't have a connection to a school.
And I agree. We did, but for the record, we did hold 2 different public input sessions when we had La Valley present its plans. The first one, 12 people came, and another one, like maybe 5 people came. And they were widely advertised, because I went back and looked. They were advertised via email, they were advertised via text, they were advertised online. I emailed it to the town, it was on the library electronic bulletin board, and for whatever reason, people didn't come, and I totally understand lives get busy. And we totally do want to hear from people, but we have not been shutting people out of making comments, but this has just been a very long, drawn-out process with lots of different points for comments. But what I will say is I feel like we're at a point now where the suggestion made by La Valley was not a suggestion based on love for any one school or desire to keep 5 schools open. They just told us what they thought, given where we were at with our facilities, the best path forward was based on what our facilities, the state they were in, and how we could best spend our money, and they made a recommendation. It wasn't based on emotion, it was just based on the state of our schools, and that's how we got to a Plan A, and now we're looking at a Plan B. And I do feel really strongly that a Plan B needs to be a solid Plan B. If you don't support Plan A, then Plan B, and that's why I liked John's where it kept all the schools open, because I think a Plan B needs to be simpler, and not be another option that people would find things that wouldn't work for them. Personally, I need to know more numbers, because my greatest fear is that $44 million won't get us anywhere near fixing all 7 of our schools, which is why we got the proposal from La Valley we did, because I believe you folks said at that time there are many points when you have buildings like that with envelope issues, some of these bigger issues, it's just better not to invest there. It's better to do other things, and that's my fear. How much will it cost to fix? And are we getting ourselves into a situation where we spend $44 million and all I see John putting in is things that fix the buildings enough so we still, $44 million later, just have a 30-year-old building that has no educational improvements, just basic fixes, and that's a question the voters need to answer at the voting booth. Is that the best expenditure of our money? I can't answer that as one person. That's an answer that 18,000 people have to answer next month at the voting booth, or as many as show up. God, I would be thrilled if 18,000 showed up, because there are 18,000 registered voters or more in this town.
One of the problems that we have as a board right now is that we're looking at money, and we're letting the money drive what we're doing. We should be looking at the priorities driving the money. We should look at, okay, what particular and specific items are in most imminent need of repair, which are most likely to fail, which are most likely to have the greatest impact if they do fail, and then determine what the costs of those are and come up with the final cost. What we're doing right now is coming up with, we're picking, things out of thin air and coming up with a number that we think is pretty close. But because of that, we can't specify what particular things we're going to be able to fix. So if we have $45 million to spend, do we know what it's going to fix? And I think that we should know that, and we should start out with what needs to be repaired and what is that going to cost. And it goes right back to what you said, Erica, is that we need to find out what the costs are before we just come up with an arbitrary, pretty close, we think, number.
I think that leads into one of the things I was going to say. I do like John's plan of going in, and I agree with Erica that we do need some big numbers before this can even be close to right. My biggest issue with that one is putting the roofs in there. I'm looking at Jeremy's budget for next year, and he has 2 roofs. He has hood roof and the west roof in there. I have a big problem putting that on a bond, because if those are needed for next year, then we need that to pass. And we don't need to try and get 2/3 gone, to get that to pass. That can't be, I don't think that can be in Plan B. And then in the next year, he has 3 more roofs on there. So those are obviously very large, very important. If we're going to be doing that, that's what I mean by the capital appropriation of raising a larger fund on a different warrant article specifically for those roofs. Those are the type of things that I don't think that we can leave to chance of, can we get the education out there? Can we get it? Repairing the buildings, yes, but certain things like the roofs, I think, need to be set aside on its own.
If I could just add, I hate to put timelines on things, but all warrant articles are going to have to be finalized and presented at the public hearing. So if you're going to do another open session for public comment, I just think sooner rather than later in order for us to be able to have warrant articles prepared. I also spoke with Renelle, who's one of the a bond attorney at Divine Millimet, and she's either willing to come and do a facilities committee meeting during the day with the board committee members, or come to a public board meeting if you're interested in having more information on the bonds. We would, I think it was Paul, you just mentioned you would need to know what the project entailed. So, and that's what we're looking to hire Mark Jobin and LaValle to work on, is having those costs, because we would have to have a cash flow statement to show the specific plan for the projects that we're going to have if you're going to do a bond for building repairs. So, and depending on how you do that, you'd have to have a single purpose bond, and so there's a lot of criteria and regulations around how to get the bond, what type of bond we're going to get. We used Divine Millimet on our previous bonds, so if you're interested in having some representation come and speak to all the criteria for bonds, please let me know, but we definitely would have to have a full plan of what we're going to do in order to receive the bond.
So to walk your dates backwards, could you kind of help me with that? So the public hearing's in January. When
11 weeks from this Tuesday.
when, in order for you to do it, you were just saying that information to create it for the public hearing, when would you need that?
In order to submit a warrant article for the public hearing?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we obviously we like to post everything at least a week ahead of time, but I would think that in order to give the public opportunity to see the warrant articles and have questions prepared or information that they want to bring forward to the public hearing, at least 2 or 3 weeks, I would think, to have some preparation for that.
Okay, I just was looking, so I didn't wanted us to have a date in our head, that's why I was asking.
Well, and I think it's only fair, too. We have a fiscal advisory committee that's working on the budget. Monday was difficult, right? It was difficult. So in planning that, the budget, and what they're going to support or what they'd like to see, they should also know what other plans the board has. And I also have one question about bonds, so now it's gone out of my head. If we had a bond, this is just arbitrary, we have a bond to repair 5 roofs. It passes. What happens when the material, is there a length of time that money has to be spent on the project before, I don't know what happens to it, if there's a problem with supply and demand, I guess is my question.
Yes, so depending on which type of bond you have and the dollar amount, typically, if you don't need all of the money at once, you have to have spent it, 85% of it, within 3 years. Okay. If you think you're not going to do it all at once. But if you're going to do a bond where you think you're going to be able to spend all of it, so if you did a bond for 4 roofs, but 2 of them you know you could get done next summer, and then the other 2 the following summer, you would have 18 months if you thought you were going to spend it all up front. So you do have time to do the project, and I talked about the logistics of even just the funds. The funds would be given to the school district. We would research different banking facilities, get rates. We would then open up another account to deposit those funds, and then the district would be responsible for managing, dispersing all of those funds for any of those projects. So that's how the process would go as far as getting the funds. But you do have time. If you don't think you're going to use it all up front, you'd have 3 years.
Thank you.
There's a progressive way in order for us to do that. You're welcome.
So I just looked at the calendar, and you were saying a few weeks, but a few weeks would take us to the end of December, and we shouldn't be releasing information at the end of December, because no one would see it. So realistically, we're probably looking at maybe December 8th, like the first week in December, like releasing things before, at least before any holidays kick in, so there's real time to consider things, because once you get to, the week of, I was just following the timeline back, once you get to the 15th and beyond, people's attention are not on these types of things, so just so people can keep that in their mind, following your timeline of needing to get information in, to get it presented and pulled together. We don't want to be releasing it at the end of December. That would not be a wise move, even though that would be a few weeks.
Paul, just to address your previous comment, it's a very valid one, obviously. So I know these repairs are very high level on the reports here, but the detailed of what those entail are in this report here, and it's pretty detailed, and it tells you what needs to be done. But to Jessica's point, I think so. We have $2.5 million that we've reserved. It's something we should talk about to the initial funding of a capital reserve, and maybe that's the roofs in the first year. That's a good idea. Of one of we need of others that we need as well.
If I recall it correctly, what we would say wouldn't that be a warrant article also? Do you approve taking what is left over at the end of the year and putting it into a capital reserve fund for the roofs? Am I basically saying that correctly?
I'm sorry, Erica, could you repeat that?
That we'd put a warrant article saying, do you approve of taking what's left over at the end of this year and putting it into a maintenance capital reserve, or whatever you would call it?
Sure, you can do that.
Okay.
That's one of your options.
Oh, no, and I agree with that. I think that makes a lot of sense. I just wanted to clarify that I understood what we would be saying. I 100% agree with that.
So I guess I'll ask, what's the expectation before we leave tonight? Where do we need to have a path here, and we need to decide what we're all comfortable with. I think the capital reserve is a no-brainer. I think we're all in agreement on there. Do we want, that's clear. I don't know if we decide a number or not, but at least we're clear on that, and I think where do we go from here is where we need to discuss before we end tonight.
I think,
Go. No, you can go. I went first last time. You go.
Okay. I think looking at the timeline of what we have to do to get a Plan B bond together, to get a cost estimate from Mark Jobin together, to get the public input together on a Plan B, is coming up on an unrealistic stage. I think that is one of the reasons why I came in thinking of, on top of the $2.5 million, appropriating more, asking for a one-time appropriation along with the whatever is left over that we had from the reserve fund into there to get some of these bigger things out, gives us the time that if Plan A fails, then we have another bite next year, because that's the one that we stand behind. And that's when we present a Plan B, and if that becomes a bond. But I think right now what we're talking about, these are great estimates, but we do need an estimator, to the point of we have no idea if that's going to be even doubled. If we can appropriate through the capital appropriation, the capital improvement, along with the reserve funds, that will get us through to come up with, if Plan A fails, because we still are hoping that goes through, then we can talk about a bond. I don't see putting a bond with what the information that we have to do on this ballot, along with the bond, to try and get a new building, being a good move in front of the voters right now.
So I guess one question I have is, do people think we should be leaving that $1.8 million in the budget, or trying to have a warrant that raises that 1.8 million very specifically for maintenance. I don't know what the answer to that is. I always get wary of warrants because if they fail, then you can't do it, but also wary of a bigger number and that scaring people off. But those things that Jeremy has identified are things that really need to be done, so I want to find any way possible to make sure whatever vehicle they are in passes through the right checkpoint. But I don't know other people's thoughts.
And Erica, I just want to, for clarification, I was emailing with Mark Jobin earlier today, and I think when we left him the other day, we had looked at, because we just didn't know what the repair costs would be for South Range Derry Village. So I think he thought initially his scope of work would be to look at Derry Village and South Range, what the repair costs would be. And he did work with Jay and Eric on a list of what the items for all schools potentially would be. Is the scope that you want him to give an estimate for when he comes on Tuesday for Derry Village South Range or for 7 schools? If I could just, I want to make sure I clarify
I
this
think it
down.
would be valuable to see it if he has it by school, just so we know, so that we have an option of what we want to, but unless other people disagree. Do people, yeah, I mean, if we could know by school what it would be if he was to look at all of them, what it would be to, I think it would be better to have all our options on the table, personally.
Is there sufficient time to do that? Today's Thursday. If he was expecting to do 2 schools, and now we're going to say, how about all of them?
Well, he's not going to give you an estimate on Tuesday of
Okay,
how
sorry,
much
I
the repairs
misunderstood.
are.
Okay.
Just his fee to do them. Yes, so you're looking for, he would give an estimate for what his cost would be to perform the work?
Yeah, the
work
detailed
of
assessment.
estimating.
Yeah, so we could have an actual number that says this is what we need for 7 schools.
Okay.
Because we took a different path earlier where we were saying, okay, based on the conditions of the schools, we're going to vote to do X, and now we're looking at a different path forward. So
Okay.
I think that would be valuable. So it sounds like we're all in agreement that there should be some form of a capital reserve fund. The question is, do we want to fund it with, raise and appropriate, or with what's left over at the end of the year? I don't know if people have strong feelings that I feel like we will have money left over, and that would make sense to fund it with that. But are there any other specific things people wanted to bring up?
I do want to go back to David's point earlier about, like, creating a threshold, right? Like, if it seems like everyone agrees that these are pretty light estimates for structural, plumbing, electrical, not including mechanical. I don't see how we could feasibly do this blue plan if those all get doubled, right? And that goes up to 65 million. So I do think setting a threshold is important, because the last thing I think we should be doing is getting an estimate from Mark Jobin and then him coming in and being like, yeah, it's going to be like 80 million to do all that stuff. So I do think we need to set some threshold, and that's probably part of the reason why that placeholder estimate is there, because I think feasibly, economically, I think that is something that we can actually do. If it's 50, 55, 65, $75 million, I don't think that's the best idea when you go back to equitable solutions for kids and what's best for the buildings in the district and the amount it's going to cost. So I do think setting a threshold or coming up with a ballpark that we are comfortable with is important for us to be considering.
And I 100% agree. That's why I was so worried about the costs that aren't in there, because the last thing I want to do is put forward this, agree to this, what's still already a large dollar amount, and then find that it won't cover some major things we need it to, and then you're not. So I don't know if I have a specific number in mind, but I'm certainly not opposed to setting one. I would agree that, we have to decide what we think people would be comfortable with, and then make sure that you're getting enough for that money, whether that's a viable solution forward. I just don't know if we have that answer now.
Also, Erica, we have to just keep in mind that while we have the La Valley as a resource for the 800-page assessment, not a lot of time for Mark Jobin to really go into 7 schools. He has been, talking to Eric and Jay, but having 7 schools to be completed for a full estimate of how much it would cost to do repairs prior to our deadline might be really tight. So I just don't want you to be surprised if I'm going to email him now and see if he will even quote doing 7 schools, that he thinks he'd be able to get it done in our timeline, but I don't want you to be surprised if that's not feasible to have done.
And I'll even say, like, that's part of the reason, I mean, I put in the renovation estimates, right? If we're talking about making sure we're setting the correct priorities and providing a 21st century learning environment, that is what those renovations give. So, we can't afford that, period. That's $118 million. We cannot afford that.
So when we come up with a threshold, I think one of the things that I like how David presented is my threshold for a Plan B of everything failed, everyone voted us down, keep the schools, try to keep them going, is something that keeps us cost neutral. I don't like the idea of putting forth a bond like like John just said. If we're going to put forth something for these schools to keep them the way they are, I want the educational benefit in there. And we can't afford that. So we either really push and keep pushing, like Austin had said before, you keep putting forth this new school in front of them, whether it be next year, take another bite out of the apple, because we do believe educationally that is going to be best for our kids. I think that we have to look forward. We keep looking at our year-over-year budget because that's what goes before the taxpayers. It's really hard for a taxpayer to not know where their heating oil and where their food is coming from and look at and see tax increase and say, oh, I can't afford that. I can't afford that bond. We get that, but we have to look at the future, and I think if we're going to be putting forth something that keeps neighborhood schools, if that's our future, we have to decide that there is educational benefit to it. We can't afford that. So I really agree with trying to get us by until we can convince this public that this is the way forward. We're going to come up with a new building that is possibly net zero, energy efficient, and then 20 years down the road, maybe we look at this again. Maybe the future board looks at this again, and we have the 2 other elementary schools that we combine into another one. Now we have 3 mid-sized schools that are a generation apart as they're aging. We are not asking in front of our voters to have all of these costs at the same time. We have them staggered 20 years apart. We are looking at the future. We're asking people, please look 20 years ahead. When it comes to Plan B, I don't think just barely getting by with $44 million is going to be looking ahead. I think we're, like Paul had said, we're just eking by.
If you're talking about cost neutral, you're talking about 1.2 million a year. Because when the Barca bond comes off the books, that gives us 1.2 million. And so David's bond of, is this year's? So David's bond of 25.8, and I don't know what that would get us. Well, but David, didn't yours though also include the 800,000 savings? So 25.8 isn't actually the right number. It's not cost neutral because,
If you keep South Range, it will not be cost neutral.
yeah, and I was hearing Jessica say that,
If you close it, it will. If you don't.
right. It would be even lower. So the question is, how much do you really get for, say, 20 million?
That's the question.
So I'm just going to point out that our schools, except for 2 of them, were not built at the same time. The problem is exactly what we're struggling with right now is finding a way to put the repair money into them. It's not that nobody's paid attention to it. It's not that nobody cared about it. None of that's true. People did care. But at the end of the day, it was this or get nothing. And we chose to get a budget that educated kids, that kept the buildings open, that kept staff inside. And now we're in the same situation. So except for South Range and Derry Village being built very close to the same time, no building was built at the same time. And look at the trouble we have with Barca right now. Our newest school, the roof is crazy. There's a waterfall in the gym, and there's another waterfall in the kindergarten hallway. So, well, that makes complete sense to me. we can see our history, it doesn't work.
I think that's my biggest fear is when I look at Barca, because we all know how many times it took to pass Barca through. And what,
Passed the first time.
I thought, I was told that it did not.
No, we put it on the ballot, it passed first time.
Okay. I was,
There were other schools years before. Actually, there was a school proposed for the Barca site. There was a K to 8, no, K1 to 8 at the time. The rest of our schools were going to be 1 to 6. That did not pass. But that, and actually, I don't even know that it actually got to a ballot. The school board was considering it. And I honestly don't remember, but Barca passed the first time it was on the ballot.
Jane, when his name Mark, is that his name? What's the expectations of the work you perform? Is it everything that Jonathan has in his list? Or is it something that we choose the 6 biggest items that we know need to be fixed? I would think he could do that in 7 schools, rather than taking the whole report that's 1,000 pages and going through line by line, trying to estimate that to real numbers. So that's I'm unclear of what his role would be in that scenario.
I mean, I think that Jay may be able to help answer the question too, but Mark actually sent me, myself and Jeremy, a document today that listed the major items in each of the 7 schools that he would target, and I don't know if that's anything else.
So if he has that list, if we could get a price, or if we paid him to get an estimate to get a price for that list, that might get us close to maybe Jessica's question of some kind of cost-neutral bond that basically is equivalent to Barca and does what we need to do without into these lands of money that's so large and we don't know how it would ever pass. It would at least be a start.
I'd like to ask Jay if he could, I think Jay was working with Mark and he could give you more details.
Thank you for having me. Can you hear me? There we go. Yes, so we did a list that you asked for probably 6 months or so ago. It's the priority list. We started with Mark with that. That's kind of the hot items, the top priorities we talked about. Mark will have some questions if there's other things, such as if you're going to renovate the building and do certain things, are you going to paint it, are you going to do new flooring, just renovate as you're renovating, are you going to fix some of those things? So those would be some of the questions I'll have for you. But we started with that major list that David is probably pointing to right there. That's what we started with. Is that helpful?
And not being him and not being the estimator, is this something, because we're concerned with 7 schools, and I could have swore he said that probably towards sometime later on in November he might be able, is this something that you believe there's a turnaround? Is this a 6-8 weeks, or is this a potential 4 weeks?
I don't know the extent of time. I do know that he will need to go to the buildings because some of those on there are about the facade and about some of the issues we had with the facade. So he's going to want to visit the buildings to understand the scope of how much linear feed and that type of stuff. So he will want to walk around each of the schools.
So the only other thing, some of the stuff on this list is going to be covered under ESSER, so it's something to, I'm sure you've had that discussion with Mark and all that good stuff.
We did. We asked him to exclude roofs and HVAC.
Just something else to consider if we are to do, to raise and appropriate funds as well as a capital reserve fund, to just do these and then take another bite at the apple next year. My assumption is that if we were to do that, we would not be fixing, let me rephrase that, we will not be replacing the roofs at Derry Village or South Range, because the idea would then be to reapply for a new school building aid next year, correct?
If you were to go down that path, you would do that first column, I would imagine, in the roof, where it showed the things. There were like things you had to do just to keep the building going. I'm saying just if you took that path, there was 3 different columns. There was the column that you had to do to keep things functional, and then there was the column to fully replace, and there was column to replace if the stuff underneath was in good shape. So it was that lowest column. There were 3 different columns in that chart.
I think at one of the last meetings, we've already agreed to do the 1 to 3 year fixes.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
They weren't the 1 to 3 year fixes, they were to get to the 1 to 3 year.
So are there any other questions or things people have in mind for tonight before the next meeting where Mark Jobin comes and presents kind of what it would take him to get us some more?
I don't know if this is something we need to discuss tonight or Tuesday, but if we're going to consider a public hearing, we do need to figure out when we're going to do that. I think tonight we should be leaving with logistics of when we can hopefully expect Mark Jobin's estimates, when we would have a bond prepared or the rates figured out so that we can then present those to the public as far as warrant articles go. So I know January is the date, but you've already said we're backing that up to December 8th. I think we need to leave here with very tight timelines and logistics.
Yeah, so I would say that public hearing would happen when we had those numbers from him, because otherwise we don't have something to get comment on. So I don't know if I have an answer to that, but I think once we had that number, then that would be, that would be when we would hold it. So I guess I don't have a direct answer because I'd want to have something to present and get public comment on. Other people can.
So we're having a lot of discussion about what we're gonna do with estimates. And so we can't use estimates to have the public talk about it, because we're not gonna have a final number until we get to a bond, or get to write a warrant article anyway.
I'd be fine with talking about estimates, as clearly you can see, but I guess, so should we put out a scenario where it's scenario A, I'm just going to use my number, scenario A, $45 million keeps the district the way it is today, and then potentially that could cost $85 million or 60, do we put a threshold on that to say what is the public's appetite for that? I guess, what are you considering?
I honestly don't know, and I didn't go through that exercise because I would have done exactly what you guys did, pull the numbers off an estimate and use it. And I looked at David's and thought, I might be a little higher, but I'm not gonna go through all of this exercise because it is estimates, right? But they've been listening to us talk about estimates for how long? A long time. We get 1,000 pages that give us some information. We have information from Jeremy that these are the things that have to be done and this is what it's going to cost. I just feel like we just keep waiting and waiting and waiting, and the longer we wait, whether it's an estimate or whether it's an idea, it's just, there's people getting frustrated and frustrated and frustrated with us because they don't have information. People understand estimate, and you're right, it could be 45, it could be 145. I don't know. And every day costs go up. You go to the gas station today, tomorrow morning it's 10 cents higher, or buy a banana and it's 50 cents higher.
And I
don't
agree.
know how, I'm not an estimator. I don't know how to do that. But
I mean, every time we've talked about facilities at the school board, there's been a period of public comment, and anyone that's here has been allowed to speak. Anyone that comes Tuesday when we have the discussion with Mark Jobin will be welcome to speak and share whatever thoughts they have.
I just feel like I'm going to agree to disagree. They've had time to talk, but they've also not had time to talk. This is huge. This is a huge process, a huge idea, a huge plan. Whatever it is that people want to believe it is, it's huge. It makes a huge impact to the taxpayers, to the children, to the entire infrastructure of the town, depending on what happens. And we're not getting the feedback that we need. It's the end of October.
And I would agree. I have no problem holding a public hearing. I hope just this time people come, because we held two related to LaValle's proposals, and the first one had about 12 people, and the second one didn't have much more than that.
I think we need to stop beating people up. Set it up. If they show up, they show up. If they don't, they don't. When we had one that had specific information about how it impacted people, what this could be, this could happen, or this could happen, we had an entire gym full of people. So I do think people will show up. I could be wrong, and we could be done in a half an hour. but at least
I
you
hope, I
put it
hope,
out.
I hope a lot of people do show up. We want to hear from them. So is the thought that we want to just hold a public hearing about facilities in general without any specific, without having our estimates ready? And if so, what date, what are people's ideas? Do we do that on a Tuesday? Do we do that on a non-school board night? Obviously, it would be in the gym because we'd want to allow more people.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. The public has all the information that we've presented here today and every other bit of information that we presented previously. So yeah, I'm fine with working within estimates, so I guess the sooner the better is probably the best, it would be the best of my mind. In addition to coming to public meetings, our email boxes are open 24/7, so please flood those. And if anyone ever emails me, I will give you my phone number, and I'd be happy to talk to you as well. So even if you can't make any of these meetings, please give feedback and reach out to us, because we've been asking for it for a while.
So, had dates. We have a school board meeting on the 25th. We have a Sending Towns meeting on the 27th next week. Looking into November, we have budget meetings on the 7th and the 21st, Jane?
Yes, I'm pulling up my calendar to,
What,
November 3rd is 2 weeks from today. That's too soon.
I know I can't make November 3rd, but, that's, no, but, so I'm just looking at, so we also have, we don't have a school board till the 8th. Oh, till the 15th, okay.
On November 2nd, Wednesday.
Does Wednesday, November 2nd work for people? Does it work on that side of the table? Wednesday, November 2nd? Work on this side of the table? Okay.
Now, that's going to be a school board meeting, correct?
No. No, it is just a public hearing to hear feedback about facilities. It won't be a presentation, it just will be based on, it'll be a chance for people to give us feedback on what they think should happen with the facilities. We can give, a brief overview of what we voted to do so far and ask people what they think. And that would be held in the gym to maximize available seating. And I would assume normal school board time, 6:30. And I would say, Austin, channels in the past we've used, in addition to the normal channels for larger meetings, we tend to do this. You should also probably, before we solidify that date, check to make sure there's no games or anything in the middle school, because it's getting into like basketball season and such. But provided that was an issue, we then would want to make sure that we reached out to the town to advertise on their website, to send out an email. The library has an electronic bulletin board, our online site, other online sites, and all forms of email we have access to. I don't know, it's very hard to know what is the best way, maybe even a paper flyer. I don't know the best way to reach people these days. Anyone could add to that list?
No, I don't, but not to sound like a broken record, but I think as a board, whatever the next discussion we have internally, we should have two things in our mind when we come to that next meeting. How much we want for capital reserve fund, and how much we want for repairs. In our own preferences, and we should have that number, in my opinion, we should have that number as a discussion point. And we should be able to formulate that number based off these public hearings, or what people want. We can kind of, formulate in our own minds what that looks like for our next discussion.
To me, I can tell you already, I don't need to make a number. That number, since we had talked about it in advance, is what's left over at the end of the year. Instead of giving it back to taxpayers, put it in a reserve fund.
Jessica talked about putting more in.
For me, putting what's ever left over is a perfect starting point, because we might as well invest.
Erica, may I ask some logistical questions about this? Will there be any type of slide presentations during that meeting? The reason I ask is you've given, a lot of times there's activities in the gym that don't get done till 4 o'clock, and with a 2.5-hour window, if
If you need slides, we need to have all the time that we can, so we can't have last minute, oh, we're going to do a presentation, because that takes an awful lot of extra setup. So if we know tonight, if we know tomorrow, then we can prepare for that and get set up.
I would count on a short slide presentation, even if it's just 3 or 4 slides saying, this is what we voted on so far, this is how we got here, tell us your thoughts. You know, just something to ground people. So I would count on some kind of slide presentation.
So, in trying to keep the emotion out of it, and trying to keep a plethora of people coming to the microphone telling us what they don't want, I'm wondering if we should ask some questions. Why not ask? This is a difficult thing for the school board to come up with, a figure that you believe the voting public of this town is going to accept. Why not have as part of this some of these questions that were, what about this? What about that? What about this? What do you think of this? What do you think of a new school? What do you think? Almost like prompts that a teacher would do. This is what we're going to have this discussion. It's an open discussion, and you can talk anything you want about facilities, but we'd like some answers to some of these questions that we've all been struggling and banging our heads about, and we want to hear what you think about keeping all of the schools open and possibly doing repairs as compared to the renovations and so forth and so on. So I'm almost wondering if we could do a little bit of prep work and maybe as part of the publicity of it, put some of these questions out that we're all struggling with and we're banging around and having conversations about, so that it can at least try to give some feedback to you folks that will answer some of those questions. We know there's a large contingent that does not want to close South Range. We know that. That's very understandable, and there's nothing wrong with hearing that again. But we need some feedback to help answer these questions.
So if people do have specific questions, could we maybe bring them to the board meeting on Tuesday, and in part of the facilities update, we can talk about what we do want to hear from people, and then we can come up with a list, and I could put it at the end of whatever short overview slideshow is created, and we could put it out before the meeting. We could talk about it on Tuesday. Is that good for people?
So are you just putting the questions out there, you're making a survey? Like, how are you gathering that information?
We're putting the questions out there so people come to the meeting and can answer specific things.
Okay.
Or even like Jonathan said, if you can't come and you want to throw somebody an email, please bring my input as part of the, can you do that? Can you?
Yeah, because we now have a school board. We now have the all school board email, so that all school board email goes to everyone. So that's a great way if you want to just give general feedback specifically about facilities. That's a great way to email it, because then every single person gets it, and you can, without having to type in 7 emails, you can just share it with everyone. So if we put those questions out there, then everyone, you can answer by email if you don't want to show up, or can't show up more.
Joe's already sent an email about games and so forth. I do believe it's early for the basketball season, but that's an old memory.
I just wanted to double check.
Oh, no, yeah, it's worth checking, but I'll work with Jonathan and Cliff shortly, tomorrow even, and we'll start putting stuff, there's no reason that we already have a date. There's no reason it can't get out on the TV. It can't get out on bulletin boards. It can't get out, maybe the fire station over there, facilities public hearing. I'm sure I don't know if you can use something like that or if they only want it for certain things, but we can reach out to that so that we can start publicizing. And then as far as questions go, the sooner the school board gets some idea of what some of the things are that they want answered, then we can even publicize those questions and get them out there and put stuff in like, please, we'd love to see you at the meeting. If you can't make it, please use the all email and so forth and so on, and we'll bring your opinions forward and so forth.
And the one thing I would add to that is we might want to add some general administration email to wherever those ideas are sent in case everyone, for some reason, someone misses something. If there's one administration that's also getting, send it to the whole school board, but also send it, someone else, someone that's looking in that all, that can maybe collate for school board members so that even though we all get individual, we can make sure we can kind of all see everything and just look it over, someone that kind of brings it together. So if everyone can bring those ideas Tuesday, kind of what those questions were, maybe we can agree on them, and then that would give you guys questions to publicize.
Some people that come Tuesday might even have questions.
So it sounds like our action items going forward are, first off, do we want to set, probably right now we don't want to set a date for another facilities meeting because we've just planned a public hearing and that's kind of a first step. So we've got the discussion about a bond and what that would look like, the discussion about a maintenance capital reserve fund and what that would look like. We can certainly continue that discussion on Tuesday. If people have thoughts then, it is going to be an agenda item on the school board hearing, so.
The only thing I don't know if we've decided on when we would have a decision made about bonds so that maybe Jane could start throwing dates out there. Should we hold that, like, if, just thinking, again, using the December 8th, if that's the time frame, we should probably have a meeting, or have that person at that meeting at least 2 weeks before. Maybe even, if possible, 6 weeks.
Oh, you mean the meeting with the bond
4 weeks.
person?
Correct.
Yep.
I would also think that we could pretty much write the warrants with a blank. Get the wording and get how this, because really all you're looking for is what the number is specific to that and what the number is for the capital reserve. So I'd like to think that we could work with Gordon and we could start working on the basics. I don't know how this works, so, I may be saying something that, you can't do that until it's voted on and so forth and so on, but I would think we could get the wording down and so it's just a matter of, once we have the number, plugging that number in and we're good to go.
Is our school board schedule in December? Could we line up that person with one of our school board meetings in December? Oh, sorry, I misspoke. In November. So would we want to have that person at the 15th if we needed to know wording? The meeting in the 15th, John, do you think? Because we probably have the 15th and then the 29th. Yeah. 15th and the 29th. And the 29th, it sounds like might be too late, so maybe the 15th would be the time to see if we could have that person come and explain to us what we... Could you reach out to her, Jane? Does that jive with... All right. Does anyone else have anything else for tonight? If not, we are adjourned for tonight.